Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is Carolyn Grant, physical therapist, writer, and transitions coach, originally from South Africa. Carolyn knows deeply about transitions after moving to London for 10 years and then to Texas, USA for 15. Along the way, she developed her expertise as a physical therapist in London, was not able to practice after the move to Texas, lost her mother while being halfway across the world, and reinvented herself by becoming a transitions coach, all the while raising her 3 daughters. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 1 of Carolyn's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
Welcome to the Round Trip Stories podcast, Carolyn Grant. We're so pleased that you agreed to come and chat with us this afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Melissa.
We got connected to Carolyn Grant, who's a transition specialist, through another guest, Shireen Joseph, who are both from Texas, and we are here in California.
Yeah, Carolyn, we are looking forward to getting to hear your story as well as about your work that you do as a transitions coach. So, Carolyn, as we get started, we have some backstory kind of introduction questions that we always like to ask everybody. So, as we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family now, as well as your family and where you grew up.
Okay, great. Yes, I am a mom of 3 girls, all teenagers right now. So that's a fun time. And we are living in Austin, Texas. I am a writer and a coach, a transition coach. And in my previous life, as I like to say, the one that was in South Africa, I was trained as a physical therapist. So I was actually born and raised in South Africa. My dad was a pig farmer, and my mother stayed home with my older sister and myself. We lived in the city, but we'd spend weekends and holidays with my grandparents on the farm. And honestly, when I think about it, I think that was my first introduction to living between worlds, you know, city girl, farm girl, and having to make the best of both. And actually talking about the farm, I remember being a child and looking at my grandmother's refrigerator, and she would collect magnets, and it would have magnets of all the countries she'd traveled in around the world. And I remember thinking, wow, wouldn't that be an amazing life? Whereas my own childhood was quite uneventful. We only went on vacation to one place every year. And the first time I set foot on an airplane was when I was in my 20s. So, yeah, I went to college. I qualified as a physical therapist and then met and married my husband. So that was before the adventures really began.
Yes, so that's great.
You know, I just wanted to say, you were talking about your grandmother, and they're like little seeds that are planted in our lives that make us think about the world. And my grandfather would travel a lot. He would bring us back little dolls from different places. And I credit him as the beginning of my international perspective story. So yay for grandparents.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. My grandmother she grew African violets, which are those beautiful flowers. I don't know if you know them. In her hot houses. And America was one of the greatest advocates for African violets. So she would often travel around the states. And the funny thing is, of all the states she went to, her favorite was Texas. And so she never knew that I ended up living here, but I like to think it's a little wink from heaven. I've got to the place she always wanted to be in. So
I love that. That's fun. So where in South Africa did you grow up? You mentioned that you were in a city and your grandparents were out in the country. What city was it that you lived in?
So I grew up in a city, it was a capital city called Pretoria.
Okay.
So we were just an hour north of Johannesburg, where most flights will come in.
Okay. So Pretoria is a large city, right?
Yeah, it's not as large as Johannesburg, but it is. It does have the Houses of Parliament, and there were so many things about my childhood that are different to my daughters. That I grew up under the apartheid regime, so in a very protected childhood, and very ignorant. I'm horrified to say, just not realizing until I was in my last few years of school that we did have an only white school. So to go through the history of Nelson Mandela being released and the fear that was in certain communities, but then to also be a part of the change was really exciting. So I had actually wanted to be a journalist when I came out of high school. And I think my mom was nervous with the state of the country as it was for me to put a microphone, in someone's face downtown where riots were breaking out and all sorts of things. So she encouraged me to do physical therapy. So even there is a point of change that changed the direction of my life.
So you mentioned that in your 20s you moved to the UK.
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about moving there and what you did there at that point.
Right. So after just 1 year of marriage, I had the travel bug, and I said to my husband, "Can we go over to London? I can work as a physical therapist, and as part of the Commonwealth, we would get a 2-year working holiday visa." So Australians, people from New Zealand, and South Africans would go you had to go before you turned 25. I know the rules have changed, but it was such a wonderful time because London was full of people just like ourselves who had no real desire to expatriate, but were just wanting to work and travel, in the mother country. So we packed our 2 backpacks, sold all our wedding gifts, and bought 2 flights to London. And before we knew it, we had been there for 10 years, had a house and 2 children. So we went with the idea of adventure and traveling, and we did do a lot of that. But at some point, we realized this would be a wonderful idea to get residency and a British passport. So we stayed and had our first 2 daughters there. And it was a wonderful time. It was before the .com it was in the .com boom and before the crash. So we all got a chance to work and travel and have a good time. So, But yeah, we'd been living in England for 10 years. And honestly, just as we had settled, my husband got a job offer in America. So that was when we moved our daughters, who were then 4 and 1, across the Atlantic. And I don't think I anticipated how difficult that move would be. I just think with both countries being English speaking, I imagined the culture would be very similar. But coming from the Commonwealth, England did feel like coming to the mother country, whereas moving to America felt like something completely foreign to me.
Well, tell us how that transition and adjustment went to the U.S. We'd like to know more.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think moving to America with 2 young daughters and no family and no support and a very different culture was very difficult. It was the first time I had to drive on the opposite side of the road. It was the first time I had to drive everywhere. I remember thinking, how do I walk to the corner shop, and I had someone say, "This is Texas, honey. In Texas, we drive." And I thought, okay, let's do a quick learning curve. But it was also the first time I really had to come to terms with grief. I think I'd always been so good at anticipating the adventure that I didn't know how to deal with the losses that I incurred moving countries. So it was really only when I sat down to write to my friends in London about all the things that I missed that I realized I was actually writing a list of losses, both tangible, like, taking our kids to the park and library time, or things we would do together going on the train, but also the intangible losses, because the first time I'd experienced a loss of identity. I would introduce myself usually as Carolyn. I'm a physical therapist. But now I couldn't because it was the first time my degree wasn't recognized, even though I had been working in some of the top hospitals in London. I would have to go back to school in America to be recognized. So it was a loss of identity, a loss of familiarity. And those are the intangible losses that people don't always know how to come to terms with. So, yeah.
That is so tough. I remember when we were in China, and our ladies ministry leader talked about that, how okay, we prepared to move and we're getting our kids ready, and our husband got mostly it's the husband who gets the job, and we're here, and I'm done moving my stuff, and now what do I do? It's this whole struggle with identity, and where you're not able to practice your skills, your professional skills. And of course, as women, we have so many things to juggle, right?
Right.
And I mean, men do too, but women usually are the caregivers, the primary caregivers, and we're usually the ones who give up our professions if our husband is transferred overseas. And so there's a lot to think about. Tell us more about what was hard during that time of transition to Texas.
Yeah. So raising children in a different country where everything is a learning curve is hard. Like even sending them off to college, we lived in Pretoria and you just went to the University of Pretoria. That was your option. And maybe you could, travel to one other university. But America, it's different. Families send their children off for college, and I'm like, I'm not ready to send you. But yeah, I think more than just the loneliness and the sheer exhaustion, really, of having to reinvent your life and start from scratch, make new friends, find schools, even find which milk to buy at the grocery store because there's so many varieties. Apart from all of that is, traditionally hard, and the culture shock. I also had to very quickly come to terms with my mother, who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And shortly after that, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So not only was I dealing with that, which would be hard anyway, but now I'm dealing with it from 10,000 miles away.
Right.
Which brought up so many feelings of regret. Why did we move in the first place, and, resentment towards my husband for, his job, and I'd had to give up my career. So all these feelings that I hadn't actually come to terms with before, I suddenly felt. So I had to face the consequence of choosing to live so far away from my family and be unable to participate in my mother's care. And not only that, just also realizing that my 3 young daughters would also be missing out on the experience of having grandparents because we had chosen to move so far away. And, I told you about growing up on the farm with my grandparents. They were a very integral part of my life. And so it was a great sadness for me that my children would not have that same experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And so your parents were still in South Africa.
Yes.
And your husband's parents, I'm assuming his family was there as well.
His mom was also in South Africa, and his brother actually was in America, which I think was part of his reason to really push, let's go try America. I was quite settled in London, and it didn't feel as far from South Africa. You're on the same time zone.
Oh, that makes
it's
a
a
huge
10-hour
difference.
flight, right? And I don't think I realized moving another 10 hours flight west would have such a big difference on when you get to call the family, how often you get to go home. It's much further, it's more expensive. So he felt it, but not in the same way as I did. And we've talked about that recently. It's just I have a very high value for family. Whereas, he was more excited about the work opportunities and being closer to his brother. So,
Have you guys been able to go back and, take your kids back
Yes.
to either London or South Africa so that they can experience those places?
Yes, absolutely. We prioritize going back to South Africa to see our families and both our parents. Um, and our kids love it, of course. There are times, and that was hard too as a mom when, we'd be in South Africa and they'd be surrounded by this family and animals, and they'd be like, why do we live in Texas? Why do we live so far away? And then I would have to justify, well, because part of the reason for moving was also giving them the opportunities as 3 girls because of the political situation in South Africa. It was never why we left, but it made it harder to come back. And that's just given me compassion for refugees and people who can't go back. I at least have that opportunity to go home and revisit things and relive things. So I often have a huge heart for refugees or immigrants who don't have the financial means to return back home. So, yeah.
Well, Carolyn, tell us something that you loved about living outside of South Africa.
I think London was such a wonderful experience, being in a cosmopolitan city with so many different types of people and cultures, and access to world-class theatre and travel. So I loved the adventure of London. And, we were married with no kids for 5 years, so we explored a lot together. I remember working in the hospital that overlooks Big Ben and just sending a message to my mom saying, you won't believe where I'm sitting. This was something we'd see on television when we watched, the news or something. And I'm like, this is my view every day. So I really enjoyed that time and made many good friends. I think because you're having babies together, it becomes it's your family away from home. And our mothers became universal as they came out to visit us and our babies. We'd say, can you hold my baby and my baby? And we'd all grieve when someone's mother left again, So it really was a sweet time. And in contrast, the initial move to America was really hard because I had these 2 little girls and everyone lives very far from each other. And if you're not confident driving, there's no park that you can all walk to. And so I found it very lonely and isolating at first. But I will say now, we absolutely love living here. So it's been a very wonderful place to raise our girls, and we're very grateful for that.
Well, you mentioned giving opportunities to your 3 girls that they might not have in South Africa. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think it's something that I have to balance with the grief that I feel from living so far away, is the gain of actually being in America. And, Texas is a lot like South Africa, the wide open spaces, the good weather, friendly people, but also the schools. And, right now my daughter's in a musical, and it's of such high quality that I can't quite believe what they get to do and the instruments they learn how to play in the band. And whilst everything is new, I am just, and the safety and the security and the comfort, I guess, of living in America is not what I grew up with in South Africa. So it's been a big driver for us to stay, even though we never intended to stay this long. I call myself an accidental immigrant. I never meant to stay this long, but here we are. We've actually immigrated to the US. So,
I remember somebody telling me or asking me in China, how long are you going to be staying? And the usual expat, if you're working with an international company, then they kind of move you every 3 years. If you're with a Department of State or an embassy, it's 2 to 4 years you're moving. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure how long we're going to stay. And she said, well, people who say that end up staying a long time. And we ended up staying 8 years before we knew it, like you were saying.
Wow.
Before you knew it, 10 years had passed and you were still in London.
Exactly. So the same has happened here. Before we knew it, 15 years have come up, and all 3 kids have gone through the school system, and my eldest is in college. So that's when you start realizing that window of leaving to go back is actually closing, because their lives have started now, and we don't want to leave at a point where this is home for them. So complicated, right?
So, what would you say that you learned about yourself as a result of living abroad in these different seasons of your life?
That's a good question. I think I learned that while I like adventure, I really resist change, which is funny coming from someone who is now coaching people through change and transition. But I think it's because of that I realize how many emotions are involved, and I feel deeply. So I have a hard time letting go of what was and have to work really hard to get closure on things to be able to move forward. So what I often say is that I've had to learn that life is a balance, like I said earlier, of loss and gain. I have to remember what I've lost, time with family, grandparents, but what I've gained is opportunities and even more travel adventures, but then also a balance between grief and gratitude. So the grief connected to those losses and the gratitude for what this country has offered us and the experiences we've had. So, yeah.
I think that what you mentioned about how you realized that you don't like change, that you resist change, and a little bit of maybe irony that you've ended up as a coach for people going through various changes.
Right.
I think actually that's part of what probably makes you good at it, is that it's something that you have had to wrestle with. And I think especially for people of faith, it's a way that sometimes, the challenges are redeemed in a way that or turned into something good, is that we can take what we've learned and then share it with other people. Whereas somebody who, when we go through things that are easy, I don't think we learn as much. And so, it's a lot harder to teach someone about something that was easy for us.
Right.
Because it's like, well, it was easy. We just did it.
You just do this. Yeah.
That's so easy.
Yeah.
Why are you having a hard time?
Right. Yeah. I like to say that, change is a form of suffering. And I think only once we've been through it and we dig deep into the lessons to learn about ourselves, I think it's a chance to really have our hearts reflected to us. It's not always nice what we see. But the resilience that grows out of that and the lessons that we learn and can therefore pass on, I think you're right. That is what has happened in my wrestling with change and transition. I'm sensitive to what people are going through, and I have great compassion.
So our last question for this first half of our interview with you is, what have you learned about the world as a result of your moves abroad, away from where you grew up?
I think what I've loved about traveling is it gave me this boost in my knowledge of different cultures and different worldviews and an understanding of my own history now that I was out of it. Like I hadn't noticed it while I was living in it, but once I was removed, and just so many things that came from that, a forgiveness of my parents, forgiveness of my own ignorance. Like, why did I not do more or find out more before, things came tumbling down? So there's so much. I've actually then been a part of a group called Be the Bridge here in America, and I find myself being able to be a bridge because I have done the work and am still doing the work of racial reconciliation. So that's why I always try and say, make sense of your story, because so much of your lived experience is what you can take out into the world. So I don't apologize for where I've come from, but I do take that with me into my present and make the changes that I can make. So, yeah.
That's good.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate you giving us that historical context because it always makes us who we are.
Right.
And then, of course, we make the choices on what to do with our history as we get older.
Right.
And I also love how you were saying that when you're out of your context, that also gives you a time to reflect on it. Like that whole fishbowl metaphor, like you don't know that you're in the water and
Totally.
as a fish until you're out of it. And
Right.
I remember my first time going outside of my country was in university. And I remember being shocked at how much everybody knew everything about the United States. And I'm like, why do you have an opinion about my country? But our countries have, again, we have our place in our world and, and people know. And so it just made me think, gosh, I need to know more about other people's countries too. So I'm not just this just have a fixated perspective on the world.
Absolutely. And I think also just the ethnocentrism that I've noticed and how we think our culture is the best culture or our way of looking at things is the best way of looking at things. And that has really been challenged by living abroad and seeing, whoa, we all think that. So we can't all be right. Someone has to give in at some point and realize we're all part of this big God story and we all have a place and a purpose and to use that story to be part of his plan. So, yeah, I think living in 3 different countries on 3 different continents, you would think I've learned so much, but I think what I have learned is that there's still so much to learn and explore. And I think having been blessed to work in large cities like London with diverse groups of people and cultures, I also learned about different worldviews and value systems, and that despite our differences, we really have more in common than we think. Whether I was in the hospital and realized everyone wants healing from being sick, or if I was at schools in different countries, like everyone wants the best for their children. Having to go through the loss of my mother, and I actually volunteered at Hospice Austin for several years, I realized again, different people, different cultures, we grieve because we love well. So I think just that universality of the human experience has been something that I've learned, and that we all just want to be known and we want to be loved. And I think that if we can take that lesson out into the world and see God in everyone and his image, in everyone, I think that has been the greatest gift from my experience.
Thank you, Carolyn, for sharing your stories from South Africa, England, and the United States. You explained that life is a balance of things lost and things gained, and that change itself is a form of suffering. After working in 3 different countries and 3 different continents, you have learned that despite our differences, everyone wants healing, the best for our families, to be known, and to be loved. So what happened with Carolyn's accumulation of life experience and wisdom from all her transitions? You'll have to make a return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Carolyn's interview when she shares her expertise as a transitions coach.
Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first-class seating? Be sure to subscribe to the Round Trip Stories podcast in your favorite podcast app and sign up for our email list at roundtripstories.com so you'll never miss an episode. We believe that sharing stories helps our understanding of the world grow larger while the distance between us grows smaller.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, helped you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.
Coming from the Commonwealth, England did feel like coming to the mother country, whereas moving to America felt like something completely foreign to me.
We're the
And
rebellious children.
totally. Now I get it. Now I've done my American history course and I know exactly what happened. You threw our tea bags over the ship. So, yeah.
I want to say especially in Texas, but I don't know.
Right. No, exactly. That's how I feel. But yeah, so our third daughter was born in Austin, where we still live. And yeah, she likes to tell us that she's the only one in the family who can run for president. And I think we're quite happy leaving that job to her.